The Forgotten Tower, an epic dice tower to add to any game top to make your experience more enjoyable. Welcome to the Craft Cave. In today's episode, I'll be walking you through my process of how I created this awesome dice tower. So the first thing I did for this project was just cut out 4 different pieces of 4x8 rectangular squares out of my 1/4-inch foam board. Just being careful to really keep all those lines straight and symmetrical, and then cut that out carefully with a very sharp blade. So once I had all those cut out, I went ahead and just taped those together with masking tape so I could just fold it up together and kind of just get a visualization for what I was working with to make any adjustments I wanted to, or just to make it easier to move forward with this project. Now you could certainly just use hot glue or even PVA glue for this step if you prefer, but I really like just being able to keep moving forward with the project and continue on. After that, I went on just to find the door spot that I wanted, so I found the center of one of these panels and then measured out equal distances on both sides. Just kind of eyeballed it to what I thought would look right and made sure it was equal. Then carefully took my utility knife and just cut out that door. And then just to add a little bit of rigidity to this structure, I went ahead and just taped up those outside corners with masking tape as well, so I could get the good measurements for the inside for my little tray piece that's going to divert the dice here in a moment. And then to do that, I just took the measurements of that inside square, cut that out, and then placed it up in there. I certainly could have made it a little more shallow, just to kind of kick them out a little bit slower, but it does work just fine the way I did it. Now at this time I also cut out the roof piece, and then just to make that trapdoor for the dice to go in, I just connected those corners and then drew a rectangle that kind of looked about the right size in the center that would also give me plenty of room just to add on boards and any other kind of details around the top. Now since I made this as a square tower instead of circular with a Pringles can or something similar that you might have seen in a lot of other videos, it did leave a few just those 2 front gaps on that ramp that would catch the dice. So I just took a couple of triangular prisms and fit them down in those corners just so they could kick the dice out if they ended up there. Tested it out a few times with some dice, made sure it was working, and just kind of trimmed up that bottom edge. Next, I had to figure out the base for this. Now I played with a few ideas if I wanted to do a rocky pool or something similar to that, or if I wanted to just pile up stones, or a number of ideas I had jumbled around with, but I ended up settling on some fences and fence posts. So to do that, cut out some about 1 centimeter square posts about just over 1 inch long, and then put some texture on with a wire brush, made a few of those, and then just hot glued those together to get the basic shape. Then I also took some of the flat pieces from some of my scrap pieces that would fit in between those posts, dry fitted it together just to make sure it was the right size, and did the same process with the wire brush, leaving them pretty rough and uneven just to make it look a little bit more maybe handmade and natural looking. After all, I was pretty happy with that, and kind of just dry fit it up there to make sure it would work. And then I was able to just kind of outline where it was all lined up for both the tower and where the dice would be ending up before I could start cutting out all the stone shapes. So hot glue those together, and then I could start taking my utility knife and just trimming down all those edges and adding all the texture and details. Now I recently just made a video where I go over a couple different styles I like to use for making tabletop scatterstone. If that's something to be interested in, you can check out this link here at the top where I make those, and hope you enjoy that. So for this one, I kind of just took a little bit from both of those styles of stone and chunked out a few different random pieces, and also took my wire brush to add some striation and variation to it, just letting the brush kind of do the work, pull out random chunks, and ends up with a real organic, natural look to it. So after all that stone was looking good, I went ahead and just took my hot glue and put that fence in place and kind of dry fit it to make sure that would actually catch the dice, not just bounce out, as well as just take a stone and add some texture to that bottom ground bed. Now we're on to one of my favorite steps, which was adding all the bricks in place. So to start with that, I just started around the door to make sure that all got a nice even lineup, and kind of just worked around that front edge on both sides and trimmed and sliced each piece to fit in nicely around the door. Now since I don't have a hot wire table, I had to make all these little bricks by hand, and to do that I kind of just took some roughly 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter by about 1 inch long cuts with my utility knife, and threw those in a plastic container with a bunch of rocks and just shook them up to add a bunch of texture to them. That worked really well to kind of knock down those edges. Now for the door, I went ahead and just overlapped all those bricks in place and then just cut them out afterwards with a utility knife, just using that door frame as a guide. and then going back through with a stone just to re-add that texture into the interior of those walls. So just kind of clean up some of the edges and corners of this building, I went ahead and just took some of the L-shaped foam pieces and put some texture in there like the wood, and hot glued those in place to wrap around all those seams. Then I also just took some more wooden planks, trimmed them into place, and put those on top of the bricks and along the top edge to also hide any kind of seam lines from that. Then once I had all that done on all the edges, I was able to start on that final row of bricks just around the top. So to do that, I went ahead and just kind of offset those a little bit to add a little bit more depth and texture just to the overall aesthetic of the build, and hot glued all those in place. Now after this second row was on there, I also had debated just doing a few battlements around the edges to add a little bit more height. But I was pretty happy with how it was looking by the time I got to this point, so I went ahead and just put in those last planks, then just trimming those all to fit in and hot gluing those in place. And with those boards, the tower was all done and complete. So to get to this point, I was probably about 3 to 4 hours invested in it, not counting time just to make those bricks. Then I was able to hot glue that into place, and then I could start working on the little bit of stone bricks there as a way to kind of slow those dice down and add a bit more texture to take away from those corners and boxy edges. Then all that was left was to get this thing painted. So to start out with this nice thick layer of Mod-Podge black paint to really cover it all up well and give a nice protective and hardening layer over the entire paint. Then from there, I primed the entire thing black with my Test Stores black model paint that is foam safe, knowing that even if there were any kind of gaps left over that didn't get coated, that the foam wouldn't be dissolving and melting. All thanks to the research I had done in a previous episode. From here, I just took a nice neutral gray and just overbrushed on all of those bricks, giving it about 75 to 80% coverage, followed by a base layer of a kind of sandy yellowish color just to get down on that terracotta clay base. And once I had all those base coats down, I went ahead and took a little bit of burnt umber and mixed that in with my neutral gray just to give that stone down below a slightly different color variation from the bricks up above. Next I took light green and burnt umber just to kind of create a mossy, muddied looking color just to get a different color variation down on the ground below. That would end up making a nice base layer for the flocking that we'll add on here at the end of the build. And I also applied just burnt umber to all the wood as a base color for that. Then next I took grass green, scarlet red, and a burnt sienna just as some different color variation for the stone, kind of experimenting with a different kind of style than I normally would. So to start, I just kind of got that base all wet with water and then took a little bit of just the straight pigment, added that to it and dabbed it off, just kind of in organic random places just to add some variation of color. Then taking my fiance's hairdryer because I have no patience, and then going back after that with some browns just in those deep recesses and shadows just to try to really push down the contrast. Then once that was dry, I went through with my green just to kind of add a moss anywhere the places that water might flow or collect and pool, and just kind of along the base there. So once all those colors were in and dried, I took that same gray that I based it all with and just dry brushed it over to kind of blend it all together, and then started just applying slightly lighter shades just to add those highlights. And you see that it really just kind of blends into the colors there without making them real vibrant like they were before, which does add a nice variation in color. Now for the other sides, I decided that I didn't want to mess with the brown, so I just went through with the red and green just to add some nice base colors down, as well as adding some moss onto the fence posts and on the stone around the building, just to really imply that the building is very old and aged and starting to be more decrepit. So again, just focusing on areas where water might pool and run down and drain off the building, as well as kind of on those flat surfaces and anywhere that it just would hold the water. On the roof there, I decided to do a little bit more patchy and kind of just really in those cracks and crevices. Then once I had all that moss effect through, I could go ahead and finish up all the dry brushing on the stone and rock there. So with that same neutral gray going over it all, and then follow that by the white, just to really bring up that contrast. Really grabs that texture and pulls it out. You could certainly do different colors or multiple layers of intensity to really kind of pull out the depth, but I kind of like the exaggerated look of the just a few single tones. So over that brickwork, I just did the neutral gray without the brownish tones in it, just to kind of keep the color slightly variation, and you can see there that the green is kind of covered up a lot more whenever you start adding that dry brushing, which kind of just hints at the subtlety of the moss. And then following that over with just a little bit of white, really grabbing those highlights and corners. Now, it seems that the more that I use this effect on the stones, the more I really enjoy it and like the look that it comes out with. And the more texture you have on there, the more you get that kind of stony and chipped look to it that I really do like on it. Now, if there's a method that you all really like to do, I'd love to hear about what you like to do for that process and the steps you take to get that result. So next I just took some burnt sienna with a smaller makeup brush and just dry brushed over all those boards and planks going against the grain there to really just grab those edges and highlights. Now it looks a little bright as you put it on, but as it dries it gets a little bit darker and just really pulls out that texture. I think it really came out good, especially there on the roof once it's all dried. You can really see the greens and yellows through that. There was a nice variation. So after all that wood was done, I went through with the same base yellow I used, but added a little bit more white just to kind of get a slightly sandier color to it. And just went through and carefully brushed that all in, making sure I clean up those edges. And also leaving it as a translucent layer so that not all that moss down below is hidden, but it just kind of subtly peeks through there. So after that I just took some black paint and kind of cleaned up just right inside the doorway there to hide anything in there. And then after that took a nice black wash just to coat all of the stone on this project, just as a way to really exaggerate those cracks and crevices and all the slots there in between the bricks. This was probably my favorite step that really felt like it brought the project together, especially after it dried, and just really added a lot of depth and character to this build. And then finally we were on to my favorite step, which was adding all the foliage to this base. So to start, I just took some of the Army Painter PVA glue and spread that out with a nice thin layer, and then sprinkled on the darker green all around the bottom. Now once I had that layer down, I took my spray bottle of just white PVA glue and water mixture, spritz that over the top of the base flocking, and then took the yellowish green mixture of flocking and lightly sprinkled that on top, which really makes a nice contrast and grass tones and colors and makes it look a lot more realistic and lively. Now next I took this package of moss and some of this green flocking that I got from Hobby Lobby and started just pulling that into little pieces and hot gluing it as overgrowth and vines around the top. So to actually do that I just put down a bead of hot glue onto the base and then took a little pinch of the moss, rolled it into kind of a rough cylinder and just pressed it in the glue, pulling off anything that was kind of extra, just leaving it as a thin layer of moss on the building. Now with the hot glue you have to be very mindful of all the little strings that come off of this, and as I was going I was being sure to pull off as many of those as I could. But this is a really fun step. I know that this one really tied it together and worked with it quite a bit, back and forth, covered up any gaps, hiding mistakes you may have made. And with this you could certainly go as heavy as you want or as light as you want with it, and it really just brings the whole project to life. So knowing that I really wanted to make this place look overgrown and decrepit and partially abandoned, I just wanted to really kind of drape those over the edge and let the vines just hang over and flow naturally, thinking about where vines might grow and attach to the building along the top of the bricks and along the floors there. So after I was happy with all of that vinage, I went through with the Hobby Lobby turf that I had gotten and just kind of pulled that into little beads, then just took the white PVA glue and put down the cracks just to really imply that there's some moss growing in between all these bricks. I was really happy with how that looked at the end and definitely added a lot of life down to these steps. And then finally it was time for the final reveal. Now I really am happy with this project, and all in all I probably spent about 6 to 7 hours in it, including making the bricks there. But I think it really paid off, and for my first dice tower to build I was really happy with the functionality as well as the style. So this video is definitely longer than the videos I would typically make, and if that's something you enjoyed or didn't enjoy, I would really appreciate your feedback down below. If this longer form content is something you'd enjoy, or just going back to the 5 to 10 minute episodes. Anyways guys, that's all I have time for today. I really do appreciate you taking the time to watch this, and hope you enjoyed something. I learned something valuable here. And if you have any ideas for projects or videos you'd like to see, just let me know down in the comments what those are, and I'd be happy to take a look at those and possibly make something about those. So anyway, thanks for watching, keep crafting, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself. Thank you.